On April 17, 1861, the state of Virginia joined the other southern states as a part of their secession plan. But on May 23rd, 55 Virginian counties voted to break away and form their own state. And 2 years later, on June 20th, 1863, 161 years and 3 days ago, the state of West Virginia was added to the Union. 138 years after this, and I was born in this new state. And in these 22 years I've been alive, I've received various comments about my time living here, like, do you have internet? Do you have dirt floors? Are you on opiates? Because my state has a massive stigma against it, and it's not entirely unjust. But West Virginia is an interesting place. That tends to happen when you're formed by a civil war. And this is the point of the video I'm making. In its 161 years of history, some wacky things have happened here, and I'm going to talk about these 161 years of wackiness in the form of an iceberg chart, where the best well-known stuff of our state's at the top, and as we go further down, there's more obscure stuff I'm sure a majority of people living here don't know about, let alone outsiders. So I really hope you enjoy this video, and I hope you can come away with it with a new view on our state. Was there anything else we could start a West Virginia iceberg with? If you don't live in the state, and you know about West Virginia, it's because of the Mothman. The Mothman is a legend that has transformed from an obscure Appalachian legend to become an integral part to not just cryptozoology, but pop culture as a whole. On November 15, 1966, two young couples named Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millette were on a date at the TNT Domes, an old World War II munitions factory located in the woods of Point Pleasant. Suddenly, Linda spotted what she described as a thin and incredibly tall, muscular man that had a massive wingspan and, of course, bright red eyes. The couple sped away, and the creature kept up with their car and followed them into the city. The couple filed a police report, which, of course, would be the first of many to hit the city of Point Pleasant within the next few months. But these sightings would come to a head on December 15, 1967. On this day, the Silver Bridge, which connected Ohio and Point Pleasant, collapsed, killing 46 people. Before the bridge collapsed, several people reported sightings of the Mothman. This wouldn't be the only tragedy the Mothman was spotted at, as several Russians claimed to have seen him at the 1999 apartment bombings, leading to the theory that the Mothman was an omen, showing up before a disaster. In 1975, John Keel released a book called The Mothman Prophecies, and in 2002, the film would be adapted into a movie, causing the Mothman to rise into the pop culture sphere. In that same year, the city of Point Pleasant held their first Mothman Festival, which has really put the city on the map. This is an event that is held annually, and is a celebration of the creature and his folklore. 1 year later, the metallic Mothman statue and his massive dump truck would be unveiled, providing another attraction for the city. In 2005, the Mothman Museum was opened, and has several artifacts involving the cryptid, most notably the original police reports and the newspapers that entered the Mothman into our public conscious. So being a native West Virginian causes me to get excited anytime we're mentioned anywhere, and most of the time, if we're being mentioned somewhere, it's because of the Mothman. I love cryptozoology, and I love the theory of him being a harbinger of doom. Just a quick note, if you ever want to visit the Mothman Museum, I recommend watching the Mothman Prophecies first, as a lot of the museum is dedicated to props and whatnot from the film. Now, do I think the Mothman's real? I want to. I really want to believe he's real, but the boring and cynical and loser side of me says he's not. But who cares? He's a massive part of our culture, and we should all rally behind him. If you don't know about West Virginia because of the Mothman, you know it because of Fallout 76, and I'm sorry if that game was your first exposure to us. Fallout 76 is an installation in the Bethesda's Fallout series, a set of video games that center around various points on the timeline of a post-apocalyptic world that was devastated in a nuclear war. I remember the second I heard West Virginia would be the setting of a new Fallout game, I was so excited. I love the Fallout franchise, and having the next game be set in my state had me over the moon. It wasn't just me, the entire state was excited. Everyone was so happy to see our state being represented on this grand scale. But then, October 23rd came, and no kidding, I skipped school to play it. And I remember my friends were calling me saying, "Tanner, how's the game? How is it?" And I'm like, well, it's a game, alright. because Fallout 76 was a mess on release. It has been improved since its release date, but its reputation tanked because of that day one release. I really enjoyed it. Being able to see all these places I've seen in real life adapted into the game was awesome. And I swear, they didn't change Camden Park at all. But once that spectacle wore off, the game became boring. I've picked it up since, and it's definitely improved. I recommend giving it a try, especially if you played it at day one and were disappointed. You'll be surprised at how much the game has changed. Okay, I lied. If you don't know West Virginia because of the Mothman or Fallout 76, you know it because of this song. Country Roads was written and released by John Denver on April 12, 1971, and since then has been a major part of West Virginian culture and has expanded further into the public conscious. I remember seeing a post about some European wondering why the American national anthem is played all the time over there, and they asked their American friend about it, but they weren't playing the national anthem. They were playing Country Roads, which goes to show how iconic it has become. While the song is a major part of West Virginian culture, the song actually takes place in Virginia, as the landmarks such as the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Shenandoah River are both in Virginia. But if you really listen to the song, it's about the author driving home from Virginia into West Virginia. In 2017, the song is officially allowed for marketing purposes in the state, and the opening words, "Almost Heaven," were long since being used as a slogan for our state. You know something? I'm a business major. No, stop laughing. But I don't need a business degree to know you shouldn't have your economy based off something that isn't going to last forever. It's a good thing the founders of our state listened, because West Virginia's entire economy has been based off of coal. Coal was first mined in West Virginia in 1810, and mining operations continued to expand through the 1800s and early 1900s. Today, coal is a controversial topic in the state. Some people vehemently hold on to it for some goddamn reason, I don't know. Maybe it's a sense of state pride, but the writing's on the wall. Coal mines have killed thousands of workers, and we're going to discuss several mining disasters throughout the iceberg. But there's also the environmental impact. Coal burning is killing our world, and the sooner West Virginia lets go of it and moves on, the better. Pepperoni rolls are a staple of West Virginia cuisine, and I'm convinced without them, our economy would have failed long ago. And I'm not that far off, because they started off as an easy meal for coal miners. They first gained prominence in the early 1920s and have continued to be a big part of our culture to this day. But you may ask me, Tan Man, what exactly is a pepperoni roll? Well, it's bread and pepperonis. If you're feeling crazy, you could stick some cheese in there, and if you're really crazy, you might dunk it in some marinara. Yeah, our staple food is an inside-out pizza. Now I get to discuss Big Jim. He's quite the character, and to the outsiders, he's probably best well known for his pet bulldog, Baby Dog, but we'll get there when we get there. Big Jim, or James Justice, first entered the public conscience when he ran and won as a Democrat for the governor's spot, but then he immediately changed his party for Donald Trump's approval.
I can't help you anymore being a Democrat governor.
They're like best friends, by the way. We're now in 2020, it sure feels like it at least. But in 2020, I don't know if you heard or not, but there's this little thing going around, and Jim Justice had several methods to convince his populace to get this vaccine against this little thing. And the first method he had was to offer incentives.
We're going to give 5 custom hunting rifles and 5 custom hunting shotguns away.
After this, he started the Do It for Baby Dog campaign, in which he, if I say pressured, it's going to make me sound like a QAnon nut. Convinced his populace to get the jab for Baby Dog. His fat bulldog he drags around everywhere. Oh yeah, if you saw that clip of the fat guy trying to put a mask on, and he covers his eyes with it, yeah, that's Jim Justice, that's our state governor. Now let's talk about Bette Midler, the first time someone has said that since 1993. In 2021, she had this to say about West Virginia. He sold, the he being Joe Manchin by the way, he sold us out. He wants us to be like his state. Poor, illiterate, and strung out. Jim Justice wasn't happy. He was seeing red. And during the State of the State address, He addressed the Midler issue by waving his dog's ass off to the world.
Baby dog tells Bette Midler and all those out there, kiss her hiney.
I watched this live, by the way. Yeah, I get involved with politics. This went viral in the next few days, and Midler replied again, just kind of calling us poor again, which, ow, shit hurts. And it looks like Jim Justice is going to replace Joe Manchin's seat in the Senate, meaning he's going to breach the containment of West Virginia and be exposed to the rest of the country. Who knows when Jim Justice and Baby Dog will pop back up again. You know, there's not a lot to see in West Virginia, so we try to pop up what we do have. And probably the most beautiful attraction in the state is the New River Gorge Bridge. The bridge's construction was finished in 1977 and has quickly become a symbol of West Virginia. It drastically cut down traffic time between two counties from 45 minutes to just a minute, and is among the tallest bridges built today. But of course, the New River Gorge Bridge is best well known for Bridge Day. This is a tradition that started in 1977 and basically centers around people jumping off the bridge in various ways. Unfortunately, a few people have passed away from doing this, so bungee jumping was removed. It's time to discuss college football, and that's the first time I've ever said that sentence. There's a rivalry between WVU's Mountaineers and the Pittsburgh Panthers, and WVU fans have taken to chanting "Eat shit, Pitt" during games to the tune of Sweet Caroline. Let's take a look. I didn't have this on my initial list, and when someone suggested I add it, I thought it was to do with Brad Pitt, because I just really do not care about college football. When West Virginia is in the news, it's rarely for anything good, and in the past 8 years, if we were in the news, it was because of Joe Manchin, one of our state senators. Manchin has a long history of West Virginia. He was our Secretary of State, our governor, and then, and most famously, our only Democrat senator. But some people have called him a Dino, as he has a history of voting with Republicans in the Senate. He held a lot of power there, as it was split 50-50, but the Senate was controlled by the Democrats due to our vice president being vice president. I'm such a good script writer. Due to our vice president being a Democrat. So if Democrats wanted a bill to pass, they really only needed to convince Joe Manchin. Manchin has announced he's not running for re-election, bringing a nearly 10-year-long Senate seat and an era of West Virginia politics to a close. I can never remember this guy's name, but I say, you know that dude on the basketball logo? Yeah, he's from West Virginia. The dude on the basketball logo does have a name, and it's Jerry West. He played for the Los Angeles Lakers for 14 years, and this photo was taken during one of the games. And I actually didn't know this, but that's not Jerry West. Or it's not officially Jerry West. The NBA has never confirmed they used this photo, but come on guys. West himself has stated he doesn't want to be the logo, as he doesn't want any unnecessary attention called to himself. He's a better man than me, because if I was the logo for a multi-billion-dollar company, you best bet I'd want my slice of the pie. You know, when I was making this Iceberg, and I was listing things off our state was known for, I got kind of depressed. We've got, yes, an awesome cryptid with a fat ass, but then we've got a failed Fallout game, a fat bumbling politician, a biological weapon, and now we've got an insanely inbred family that's known for being inbred. If you don't know about the Whitakers, yeah you do. If you still don't, then watch this. This clip goes viral every other hour, and it's usually captured something like, oh, most inbred family in America, look at these people, look! But there's a larger story to this clip than just impression farming. As you know, this is the Whitaker family, and they live in Odd, West Virginia, a tiny town home to 700 people. The story of the Whitakers dates back to 1882, when a set of identical twins brothers' kids married each other. Ugh. And then these kids married each other, and on and on and on and on and on, and now we're in 2024. The other citizens of Odd have taken to protecting the Whitakers, and I'm glad someone is, because some of the articles written about these people are downright deplorable. They speak on these people like they're not. They talk about them like they're animals. If you're interested in the Whitakers, the YouTube channel who exposed them is called Soft White Underbelly, and their series isn't exploitive, it's informative. Give it a watch if you're interested. There are 1.775 million people that call West Virginia home, and of these people, about 156,000 of them live in the 5 largest cities, leaving an additional 1.6 million being scattered out across tiny, downright microscopic forgotten towns. And that should not be taken offensively. I live in a tiny town. And a lot of these towns stand out for one reason or another, and we're going to discuss the first one here. In Wayne County, among the Tug Fork and Big Sandy River sits a tiny town of Fort Gay. During the latest census, 677 people called this town home, and it earns its spot on the Iceberg thanks to Xbox. In 2010, a man named Josh Moore had filled out his Xbox account, writing Fort Gay, West Virginia as his location, to which Microsoft would suspend him for a homosexual reference. Josh was mad, and he called Microsoft support, to which they would not relent, claiming that Fort Gay was not a real place. He kept telling the representative to Google it, but again, they would not relent. The mayor even got in on it, but Microsoft would still not budge, claiming that the word gay was offensive in any context, which upset Josh. He himself has said he's not gay, but it made him feel like Microsoft hated gay people. Finally, Microsoft caved, apologizing for the ban. Do I have any followers from Fort Gay? Shout out to you all are the best. Of course, the best one-known cryptid in West Virginia is the Mothman. But we have a bunch of funky little guys walking around, and we're going to cover them throughout the Iceberg. And this is the first one, besides the Mothman. At 7 p.m. on September 12, 1952, 2 brothers saw a fireball streak across their sky in the town of Flatwoods, and a group soon gathered to investigate. They arrived at the crash site, where they saw a pulsing red light. One of them shined a flashlight towards it, where they saw a tall, man-like figure with a round red face surrounded by a pointed, hood-like shape with sharp, claw-like hands. And it soon glided after the group while hissing. While not as popular and widespread, the citizens of Flatwoods have adapted the creature into their local culture. There is a Flatwoods Monster Museum, but I cannot comment on its quality, as I have not been. But what I can comment on is the validity of this claim. The common explanation is that the people saw a barn owl, and somehow a shadow was cast over it, giving it its wing imprinted. I don't know, some nerd explanation, because no one wants to admit the fact that it is an alien. Except for Fallout 76, who wrote the Flatwoods Monster into their lore as being an alien that crash-landed into Appalachia. Like we said earlier, if you come to West Virginia, you're going to realize very quickly that there's not much to do. But one of the things we try and bolster our tourism with is Camden Park, the only amusement park in the state. Now that might sound like, oh, an amusement park, yeah, that's awesome, but you get there and you see this. Camden Park is pretty run down, and it's a miracle that no one died there. But I didn't say injured. The place first opened in 1903 and was named after one of our state senators, Johnson Camden. What a legacy to leave behind. Camden Park's biggest attraction is its wooden roller coaster, the Big Dipper. I've been on it, and it's fun. The splitting of the wood as you rode over it really added to the experience. When people travel to West Virginia, they insist on stopping at Tudor's Biscuit World. This is a restaurant that surprisingly specializes in biscuits, and it first opened out of Charleston in 1980, and it's since expanded to 74 locations across West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, and Florida. I'm gonna be completely honest, it's disgusting. Every time I've eaten here, I've gotten sick. It's like biting into a mouthful of grease. So if that's something you like, hey, come to Tudor's. But if you're planning on doing something other than shitting all day, maybe go somewhere else. A lot of the United States Capitol buildings are downright ugly, like the one in Alaska. They built a pyramid, and not even a good-looking one like the one in Memphis. But among these ugly Capitol buildings stands out a few things of beauty, and West Virginia probably has the prettiest state Capitol building. The building was finished in 1932, and its biggest highlight has got to be its golden roof. The roof was added in 1932, with it being restored in 2005. But we have a long history of Capitol buildings. When West Virginia became a state, our capital was first in Wheeling. It then moved to Charleston in 1870, back to Wheeling in 75, back again to Charleston in 85, where it remains to this day. However, the Capitol building we currently have wasn't built until 1932, but this was the third Capitol building in its modern spot of Charleston. In 1921, the Capitol building in Charleston burnt down, a story we would discuss in detail later on. After this Capitol was burnt down, a temporary Capitol was constructed, which took a mere 42 days to be built. It was nicknamed the Pasteboard Capitol, and was used while the West Virginia Capitol building was being built. It would too burn down in 1927, but enough work was done on the new building to allow government operations to take place, and this is where they've operated since. Today, the Capitol is open to the public for tours, and there is a museum on the property with artifacts dating throughout all of West Virginia's history. Nate Petrosky is the most famous and one of the only content creators based out of West Virginia. His entire page is centered around his off-grid homesteading, with his biggest following on TikTok being 3.6 million followers. Nate frequently posts videos with his dog Minion, and recently went viral because of his live streams of Hank, his automatic lawnmower. I remember watching. Hank ended up breaking down, and Nate streamed every night for like a week, taking him apart and trying to fix him, and people were following it along like it was a medical drama. I love Nate, and I'm always happy to support someone from my state, and I definitely recommend his channel. In 1928, an I-bar bridge connecting the cities of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and Gallipolis, Ohio was finished. Officially known as the Point Pleasant Bridge, it was commonly referred to as the Silver Bridge because of its paint color. Unfortunately, the bridge would only last for 39 years, because on December 15th, 1967, it would collapse into the Ohio River. This took place during rush hour, leading to the deaths of 46 people. The bridge fell because of a defect in a single link, now known as I-bar 330. There was a tiny crack in that grew over the years, eventually causing the bridge to collapse. The collapse of the Silver Bridge brought conversation around the condition of every American bridge, leading to more safety protocols being placed at construction. Defects in other bridges were found and repaired, hopefully preventing another Silver Bridge incident. 2 years after its collapse, the Silver Memorial Bridge was opened, connecting the two states once again. Today, a plaque is in Point Pleasant, memorializing the 46 who lost their lives. And at the Point Pleasant River Museum, you're able to see a scale model of the old Silver Bridge. West Virginia has two major colleges, WVU and Marshall University. While WVU is best well known for the rivalry with Pittsburgh, Marshall is unfortunately known for a more morbid reason. In the 70s, Marshall University was rivals with the East Carolina Pirates in Greenville, North Carolina. On November 14, 1970, a game was taking place in North Carolina between the two teams, in which Carolina won in a 17-14 upset. The Marshall team, boosters, and other citizens had gotten onto a plane at 7:30 p.m., headed back for Huntington, West Virginia. There was a bad storm that night, and the pilot had descended to a low altitude too quickly, striking the tops of some trees, killing 75 people, everyone on the plane.
This is CBS News. Shock and sorrow mingle on Marshall University campus following death and plane crash of most of school's football team. Dimensions of the disaster, new reports indicate there may be too few.
The following day, Marshall University did not hold classes, but instead held memorial services. Several memorials were made in honor of the football team, and perhaps the most famous one is the fountain on Marshall's campus, which is shut off once a year in honor of the team. In 2006, a movie called We Are Marshall was released, which depicts the events of the plane crash and the aftermath with the attempted gathering a new football team. Harpers Ferry, West Virginia is the easternmost town of the state and is a little over an hour away from Washington, D.C., and it's because of this a United States Army was built here, which stored weapons and had facilities there to build more, and because of this, it became a target for John Brown, an abolitionist. Brown was a very vocal man, calling out the abolitionist movement as inadequate. He was quoted as saying, "These men are all talk, what we need is action." In the months leading up to the attack, John Brown rented the Kentucky farmhouse in Maryland, where he began to form his attack plan. His hope was to take over Harpers Ferry, get a message out to the enslaved people, have him meet him there, arm the crowd, and begin a nationwide armed slave revolt. It's before this when he spoke with Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and attempted to get them to join his cause. Douglass called it a suicide move, and Tubman didn't join because she was sick. But with about 3 months of planning and gathering his forces, the fateful day in October arrived. Brown and his army, 18 in total, attacked the armory on October 16th. They captured it in 4 hours and freed the slaves there who joined his party. For the next 2 days, Brown and his men held the armory and defended it against the townspeople who had formed a militia. News of this rebellion spread throughout the country, but no one came to join Brown's fight. But who did come was Robert E. Lee, leading a platoon of 90 United States Marines. 8 hours later, the Marines breached the gate and captured John Brown and his raiding party. Brown was imprisoned, where he was put on trial 2 weeks later, but his court proceedings lasted for 45 minutes, where he was found guilty and was sentenced to death. He was to be hung, to be carried out on December 2nd. Fun fact, John Wilkes Booth was in the audience. The raid on Harper's Ferry was seen as a precursor to the Civil War, as the state seceded from the Union a little over a year later. At that time in the country, the North and the South hated each other, sure, but hopes of a compromise on the slavery issue were on each other's mind. Harper's Ferry killed that. The divide felt between the two sides widened, and war was on the horizon.
Has anyone seen Chuck Yeager, the man who discovered the speed of light?
Why yes, Carmen Santiago, I do know who Chuck Yeager is. The man who discovered the speed of sound, not light. Chuck was born in Myra, West Virginia, and enlisted into the United States Air Force on September 12, 1941. Yeager served through all of World War II, but it would be after the war where he would earn his real fame. In October of 1946, Yeager was in a group of volunteers to test a new aircraft, the X-1. He was chosen, and he rode in the plane, becoming the first pilot to break the sound barrier. After this, Chuck would continue service in the Air Force through the Vietnam War, before retiring in 1975. After this, he lived a peaceful life, doing cameos and attending public speaking events. But on October 12th, at the age of 89, Chuck Yeager once again did his record-breaking flight, breaking the sound barrier once again. Charles would then pass away on December 7th, 2020. The airport in Charleston, the capital, is named in his honor. The United States has several mountain ranges, and my state is defined by one, the Appalachian Mountains. And these things are old. So old, in fact, their formation began 1.2 billion years ago. They really became mountains 480 million years ago, which is still insanely old. This is what the Earth looked like 480 million years ago. And if you notice, Europe is pushing against America, and of course, they broke apart. But Europe took some mountains with them, the Highlands. Yes, the Scottish Highlands and the Appalachian Mountains are in the same range. But back to the age of these things. There are no fossils inside of them, because they are older than fossils. But that's not the only thing they're older than. Let's do a quick list. Trees, teeth, dinosaurs, Saturn's rings, and the Grand Canyon, which is a baby in the grand scheme of things, being made 5 million years ago. So we touched on West Virginia's Civil War involvement with Harper's Ferry, but we were a part of Virginia at this time. But the state was created as a direct result of the Civil War. Once the state seceded from the Union, Virginia was a part of this group. On the vote for secession, 49 delegates, who would later represent the 50 counties of West Virginia, voted against secession, further adding to the divide between the east and west parts of the state. The east part of the state looked down upon the west, as they were underrepresented in Congress, and they had two separate economies. Of course, Virginia went along with the Confederate secession plan, but the delegates and citizens of West Virginia were not happy. 1 month after Virginia seceded, a meeting was held in Wheeling, West Virginia. Discussions and votes were held over the next month, and about half the state was for Virginia secession, but just over half were against it. So it was decided that the state should break away from Virginia. They joined back with the Union. statehood was approved in December of 1862 on the condition that slavery would be phased out. Another discussion on this was held where the West Virginian government agreed, and on June 20th, 1863, West Virginia became the 35th state in the Union. Here's our third cryptid on the iceberg, and this one hails from Grafton and is aptly named the Grafton Monster. Which, first of all, Grafton and Flatwoods, you gotta work on your branding, man. Can you imagine if the Mothman was called the Point Pleasant Monster? Do you think it would be near as well known? Let's give them a cooler name. Comment one down below. The Grafton Monster could be called something like, I don't know, the Shambler, or the Headless, or something. Anything is cooler than the Grafton Monster. Regardless of its lame name, the Grafton Monster was first spotted on June 16, 1964. It was described as a 9-foot-tall, headless beast with the skin of a seal. Robert Cockrell encountered this thing on his way home from work, and it was just sitting in the middle of the road. The monster left, and he later called his two friends to investigate the area with him, and they found nothing. Other sightings occurred, which caused nightly militias to gather in an attempt to find this monster, and they were unsuccessful. Some explanations have been put forward, but they're just downright stupid. One person was asked, and he suggested it was a polar bear. Another suggested it was someone pushing a cart that was way too filled with boxes. Cockrell himself suggested it could have been an alien or an interdimensional traveler that stopped in Taylor County. All great idea, guys, but I'm gonna go with my own theory. This guy was tired and cracked out on something. Alright, listen up, because this just may be the most important story on the iceberg. The Battle of Blair Mountain. One of the largest labor uprisings in history. Once the United States Mine Worker Union was founded in 1890, coal mines in several West Virginian counties began to hire only non-union members, and would fire anyone a part of the union. These miners also lived in company towns, so being fired meant being evicted. This led to wide-scale protests and even ended in a massacre. The Mattawan Massacre, which we would discuss later down. In this massacre, a man named Sid Hatfield was killed. Now, Sid was a friend of coal miners, walking them home once they got too drunk rather than arresting them. So his death was the catalyst for a protest group of 10,000 men strong to march to Mingo County. These men were protesting awful work conditions, awful housing, low wages, and just general poor treatment. They would not make it to Mingo County, as they were attacked by deputized town people in Logan County. The two sides clashed at a peak near the southwest, Blair Mountain. For 5 days, the two sides clashed, and this story spread all throughout the country and reached President Warren Harding, who then sent a letter down to the protesting miners. This letter fell on deaf ears, literally. Most of the miners there could not read, so this letter meant nothing. So Harding stepped it up and heeded West Virginia's request for federal troops, sending in a detachment of soldiers to break up the strikes, to which the miners threw down their arms. Their battle wasn't with them, it was with the coal industry, a battle that continued past Blair Mountain. At the end of the Civil War, Ann Jarvis had recognized that many families were separated, so she organized a committee dedicated to bringing these families back together. These efforts would reflect on her daughter, Anna Jarvis, who realized the importance of the family unit, and more specifically, mothers. In 1908, she held the first official Mother's Day holiday, taking place in a church in Grafton, West Virginia. She wanted to expanded enough to be recognized as a federal holiday. Most people began to celebrate it, and it would be made an official holiday in 1914, officially taking place on the second Sunday of May. By the 1920s, Anna had become disgusted with the holiday because of how commercialized it had become. She wanted it to be a celebration for mom, shown through love, not money, and this wasn't happening. Mother's Day continued to be monetized, and by the end of her life, she was disowning the holiday altogether. But Anna failed with this goal, passing away in 1948. At the onset of World War II, America kicked its military production into high gear, opening several manufacturing plants all across the country, and one such was opened in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The West Virginia Ordnance Works operated between 1942 and 45, and employed 3,500 people at its peak. Once the war was done, the plant's purpose had been served, so demolition began. Today, only a handful of concrete domes remain, and they have been retaken by nature. These concrete igloos are buried in the earth and are among the creepiest sights of West Virginia, made creepier by the fact this is where the Mothman was first sighted. Just a quick reminder, 2 teenage couples were on a date out here because I cannot stress this enough, there is nothing to do in this state, and it's here where they spotted the Mothman for the first time. During the Mothman Festival, tours are given of this area, and they're open to the public for anyone to visit, but like I said, they're completely grown up and grown over, so good luck getting there. Among the Tug Fork River, bordering Kentucky and West Virginia, 2 families waged a battle that lasted for 30 years. On the Kentucky side lived the McCoys, led by patriarch Randolph McCoy, while the West Virginia side housed the Hatfields, led by William Anderson Hatfield, or what he became better known as, Devil Anns. Their hostilities began during the Civil War, as the Hatfields were with the Confederates while the McCoys were with the Union, and a member of the McCoy family named Asa Harmon was killed by the Hatfields. This began an upset between the 2 sides that festered for a while, but the second round of escalation comes 13 years later when the 2 sides argued over the ownership of a pig. Floyd Hatfield claimed it was his, but Randolph McCoy claimed it was his. And the matter was decided by the local town judge, Anderson Hatfield. And of course, he sided with the Hatfields. So now what's a story of 2 warring families without some romance, and that's exactly what came next, as Rosanna McCoy began to date Devil Anns' son, Johnson Hatfield. Johnson was arrested by a McCoy militia on bootlegging charges, and Roseanne, along with some other Hatfields, rode out and broke them out after a brief fight. And get this, after this daring rescue, Johnson left Roseanne. The feud remained like this for the next few years, just simple back and forth arguments and an occasional murder, just the typical Kentucky activities. But these heated up to a new magnitude on New Year's of 1888, when the Hatfields surrounded a McCoy cabin and fired upon the sleeping family. The cabin was then set on fire, and the 2 sides fought through the night. A few days after this massacre, a Kentucky posse rode into West Virginia to track down Devil Anns. But none of the Hatfields would come quietly, so they were taken out. Eventually, Devil Anns and the remaining Hatfields surrendered. This, and the feud as a whole, was upsetting the governors of Kentucky and West Virginia, who threatened militia invasion should this issue continue. But with the arrest of the Hatfield posse, it was over. In the modern times, the Hatfields and McCoy remain a well-discussed point of history for these 2 states, with several historical sites dedicated to the family feud. And speaking of family feud, the Hatfields and McCoys taped an episode together in 1979, where the McCoys won. In Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, there's a Hatfield and McCoy dinner show. And of course, the Braithwaites and Grays feud in Red Dead Redemption 2 is heavily based off the Hatfields and McCoys. A few celebrities have called West Virginia home, and we're going to use this tier to discuss them. Don Knotts, who played Barney Fife on The Andy Griffith Show, is from Morgantown. Bill Withers, a musician best well known for Ain't No Sunshine, is from Slab Fork. Steve Harvey, who is famous for, oh, I'm kidding, you know who Steve Harvey is. He's from Welch, and he actually has a street named after him in Charleston. And actor-wise, Brad Paisley is from Glendale, and Jennifer Gardner is from Charleston. We discussed Jerry West earlier, and we'll touch on some more famous people later down, such as Mary Lou Retton. On October 4th, 1957, a group of friends gathered around their small town of Coalwood, West Virginia to hear the latest news. The Soviet Union had launched a satellite into space. This inspired them to pursue their own rocketry. The boys began to build their own model rockets to launch, and they won several local competitions and fairs at their school thanks to their work. This was the story of Homer Hickam, who later went on to join NASA. He published his life story under the title October Sky, and was later adapted into a movie called Rocket Boys. If you think you've heard the name Homer Hickam, that's because he got a furry fired. A girl went to Twitter to brag about her NASA internship, and a man responded saying language. And then she responded with a bunch of words that will cut my paycheck, saying she's an intern at NASA, to which Hickam said, and I'm on the National Space Council that oversees NASA. The furry, whose name was Naomi, lost her internship. But it was not Hickam's fault. He advocated for her, saying she shouldn't lose a job for a simple tweet, but she did. The B&O Railroad isn't just a spot on a Monopoly board that the annoying person in the party buys, it is the oldest railroad in the United States, and was first made to transport merchants from Baltimore into the Appalachian area, mostly Ohio, which is where the name Baltimore and Ohio, or B&O, come from. The railroad opened in 1830 and expanded into West Virginia and even had a line clear to Chicago. By 1970, the rail line operated with 10,500 miles of track, but it would soon fold into the CSX transportation network in 1980. Vulcan, West Virginia is a tiny town on the border of Kentucky. The town had no road connecting the two states, and citizens had to rely on a swing bridge to get across. The bridge began to rot and fall apart, and it finally collapsed in 1975. Now, people had to use a tiny railway bridge that connected the two states, and children were having to crawl under railroad cars to get to school. And unfortunately, one kid lost a leg doing this. Two elderly couples drove their cars into the river, and the railroad companies began to prosecute people for crossing. For years, the mayor of Vulcan, John Robinette, pleaded with both the state and federal government to build a bridge. But everyone refused because they didn't think it was worth it. So John and Vulcan were desperate enough to reach out to the Soviet Union, asking them to build a bridge. Keep in mind, this was in the middle of the Cold War, and one of the United States had just reached out to their greatest enemy, highlighting the failure of the American government. The Soviets took advantage of this, and they sent a journalist to survey the area where they came to an agreement to build the bridge. But within hours of the Soviet diplomat arriving in Vulcan, Governor J. Rockefeller announced that the state would fund the construction of the bridge. 2 years later, and 6 years after the original bridge fell, Vulcan and Kentucky were connected once again. Off Route 2 in Cabell County, West Virginia sits Hillbilly Hot Dogs, a roadside hot dog stand. The reason it's on the West Virginia Iceberg and has any relevance to the state is the fact it was on diners, drive-ins, and dives. Listen, it's slow around here. The restaurant has a very rustic feeling, and you eat inside a school bus. I've never been myself, but I've never heard a positive word said about it. I've only heard how disgusting it is. But Guy Ferrari said he liked it, but has he never not liked the restaurant? I used to watch a lot of diners, drive-ins, and dives, and I don't think he's ever went, yeah, this fucking sucks. Anyways, if you want to watch the episode, it's Season 3, Episode 6. Like we said, there was this little thing going around in 2020. You might remember it. It was a sickness, and this sickness spread fast. It entered the United States in January 2020, and by March, 49 out of 50 United States had the sickness. So who was the last state to not get the sickness? That's right, West Virginia, baby. Now, of course, it was in our state. We just couldn't afford to test people for it. The first confirmed case came on March 16th, so now all 50 of the United States officially had the sickness. The Greenbrier is a luxury hotel located in the Allegheny Mountains in Greenbrier County. The hotel first opened in 1776, the same year America declared independence, and it's housed 28 of our presidents through various times in history. During the Civil War, the resort was captured and lost several times by both sides, and it was almost burnt down by the Union, but it survived. In 1910, it was purchased by the Chesapeake and Ohio Rail Company and was expanded into the modern-day Greenbrier Resort. The Greenbrier then served for more political needs, imprisoning diplomats of the Axis powers in World War II, and later was purchased by the Army to be used as a hospital. It was then sold back to the rail company. Since it was so close to the United States Capitol, an underground nuclear bunker was built for Congress to be moved into in case of an emergency. In the 2000s, the hotel faced several years of financial hardship, which caused the mysterious benefactor to come forward and purchase the hotel. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Big Jim. He's back, and yes, he owns the Greenbrier. That's basically the full history of the resort. But the hotel has popped up a few times in pop culture, most notably in Fallout 76, where the aforementioned bunker is also included. It was also the subject of Norm Macdonald's $1 million question on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
During the Cold War, the U.S. government built a bunker to house Congress onto what golf resort? The Breakers, the Greenbrier, Pinehurst, the Broadmoor.
Herschel Woody Williams was a veteran that fought for the United States during World War II, and he hailed from a small city called Quiet Dell, West Virginia. Williams was a small kid, being born at 3.5 pounds, and it wasn't expected he was going to live, but he made it. He then tried to join the Marines in 1942, but was too short. Once the Marines lowered the height requirement 1 year later in 1943, he joined. Williams was assigned to the 32nd Replacement Battalion on October 30th, 1943, where his unit was trained with the use of flamethrowers. Williams' prominence comes from the Battle of Iwo Jima, when he went from Japanese pillbox to pillbox with his flamethrower. Despite facing rifle fire and bayonet charges, Williams went back and forth from his encampment 5 times, long enough to refuel and leave again. Williams survived the war and was given the Medal of Honor by Harry Truman. He then retired after 17 years of service with the Marines, where he lived the rest of his life in relative quietness, but unfortunately passed away on June 29, 2022 at the age of 98. He was the last surviving person to receive the Medal of Honor from World War II. Today, his remains are buried at the West Virginia Capitol building. We wouldn't have landed on the moon if we didn't have a West Virginian on the team, and this West Virginian was Katherine Johnson. Katherine was born in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, and took an interest in mathematics at an early age. Her local high school did not offer classes to African American women past the 8th grade, but it was arranged for her to go to a high school in Institute, West Virginia, where she graduated from at the age of 14. She went on to college and took every available math class, decided she wanted a career involved in the field somehow. She got her start as a school teacher in the 30s, but found her place at NACA, an early version of NASA, where she began to calculate complicated equations related to flight. It's here where she left her biggest mark, as she helped calculate the trajectory for several important American space flights, including the launching of Alan Shepard, the first American in space, the Apollo 11 moon landing, and again working on the Apollo 13 mission. Katherine retired in 1986, and would pass away in 2020 at the age of 101. If you know Katherine and her story, it's probably due to the film Hidden Figures, which was based off a book of the same name. It follows Katherine Johnson and 2 other African-American mathematicians working at NASA, Mary Jackson and Dorothy Vaughan. It's recently had an audio going viral on TikTok you've probably heard.
And I work like a dog day and night, living off of coffee from a pot none of you want to touch.
But this audio should not be Katherine Johnson's only legacy. She was a brilliant mind whose story needs to be shared and remembered for years to come. Here's a fun drinking game. Every time you see a building with Robert Byrd's name on it, take a shot. Your liver will be destroyed the second you enter Huntington. Robert Byrd was another West Virginia politician, serving as our senator from 1959 to 2010. 51 years in total, making him the longest-serving senator in the United States. But we can now discuss the Triple Ks, who wear white hoods, as Robert Byrd was a proud member. In the early 40s, Byrd had gathered over 100 friends, family, and associates to form a chapter of the White Hoods in Sophia, West Virginia. It was made in honor of his father, who told Robert that they were the saviors of the country. And hey, Byrd wanted to save the country, so he formed the chapter. Robert then wrote to Joel Baskin, a Grand Dragon of the White Hoods, detailing his work in Sophia. It was Baskin who responded saying, "You have a talent for leadership, Bob. We need young men like you in the leadership of this nation," inspiring his career in politics. Byrd began by opposing the Civil Rights Act and federal desegregation. Now, Byrd would reflect on these efforts 50 years later in 1997, when he said joining the Triple Ks was the biggest mistake of his life, encouraging children not to do the same. But we'll come back to that. Let's discuss his work in the Senate. Robert Byrd was, and still is, insanely popular in our state. I mean, he would have had to have been. He was our senator for 50 years. Byrd was responsible for securing funding for West Virginia, gaining over $1 billion for public works in the state, including highways, schools, and other agencies. Today, over 30 projects have his name on them across the state. He also started a scholarship fund for West Virginia students in both public and private schooling, and it's still given out to this day. But as 50 years came and went, Byrd would be elected for one last term in 2008, where he endorsed President Barack Obama, where he was asked about his and his state's opinion on the president's race, to which Byrd said, "Those days are gone, gone." Among failing health, Byrd was hospitalized on June 27, 2010, where he would pass away at age 92, leaving behind a very complicated legacy. Robert did a great thing for our state, but his past should not be forgotten, and there is a deeper conversation to have about his legacy. You can mention the good and the bad, and one doesn't triumph the other. White Sulphur Springs is the city that houses the aforementioned Greenbrier Resort, and it's a big draw. A sulfur spring is a natural hot spring that contains sulfur, and it's used to help treat medical problems. The first person to use the spring's water was suffering from joint pain, so they bathed in the waters to help treat it. In the years since, people have flocked to the springs to help treat diseases such as liver disease, arthritis, and stomach sickness, among others. I honestly thought this place was a bigger deal because my 8th grade West Virginia history teacher made it out to be like a holy mecca, but I had a hard time researching anything about this. Here's our next strange town of West Virginia, Thurmond. And Thurmond is a ghost town in every sense of the word. Thurmond was established in 1900 and quickly gained a booming economy thanks to it being a part of the B&O Railroad, and with the newly blossoming coal mining business. But as the coal mines dried up, so did the city, or I guess the state did. But Thurmond was hit particularly hard. In 1930, Thurmond's biggest hotel was burnt down, beginning the city's decline. The city was practically a ghost town in the 50s, and 70 years later, only 5 people call it home, making it the least populated city in all of West Virginia. Today, the town is more of a visitor station, where people can stop and step into a bygone era. In 2009, a documentary called The Wild and Wonderful Whites of West Virginia was released, and it focused on the White family of Bandytown, West Virginia, with a particular focus on Jessica White, the dancing outlaw. Jessica's father, Ray White, was a professional tap dancer, and he's passed these skills off to his son, who has made a name for himself. He featured in the previously mentioned documentary, detailing his dancing skills and his life in rural Appalachia, detailing his struggles with depression, poverty, and addiction. The film was screened at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York City and was a success, airing to mainstream television soon after. A week after the film's release, Jessica was arrested on drug charges, and the film's producer paid his bail, and a month later, the charges were dropped due to a lack of evidence. Today, Jessica White is keeping a low profile with a somewhat active social media presence. His biggest project was his appearance on Grand Theft Auto V, as he voiced the Rebel Radio DJ, and he performed motion capture for an NPC, doing his famous dance. Mary Lou Retton was a gymnast hailing from Fairmont, West Virginia. She began her career in gymnastics after watching Nadia Comaneci's performance at the 1976 Summer Olympics as she defeated the 2-time winner Olga Korbut. Mary trained for several years before performing at the 1984 Summer Olympics, winning a gold medal in the individual competition, as well as 2 silvers and 2 bronzes. This made her the first American woman to win a gold in Olympic gymnastics, making her one of the most popular athletes at this time. She'd also win a gold in 83, 84, and 85, before retiring in 1986. Mary has stayed active since all of this has happened, appearing in several TV shows and commercials, and even appeared as a contestant on Dancing with the Stars in 2018. Teachers across this country deserve a bigger paycheck, and that goes double, triple, quadruple for West Virginia teachers, who rank at 48 out of the 50 United States in terms of wages. The teachers recognized this, and they took a stand in February of 2018, going on strike. The strike came as Governor Jim Justice offered a 2% pay raise for 2019, followed by a 1% raise in 2020 and another one in 2021. But this was not satisfactory to the teachers, who began to discuss a strike. On February 21st, Attorney General Patrick Morrisey said a strike would be illegal and would support the arrest of any striking teachers. On February 22nd, all 55 counties began a strike, and all public schools were closed. An estimated crowd of 5,000 teachers stormed the West Virginia Capitol building, while some groups picketed along the respective schools. The strike lasted for 5 days, ending on March 3rd, with an agreed 5% pay raise to all state employees, and schooling resumed on March 7th. Just remember, people, we're going to talk about it more as we go further down. This state was built by unions. It was also built by labor strikes. Just keep that in mind, teachers. I was in high school during this, like a sophomore, I think. I was just happy to get out of school because Fortnite had just came out. And I looked back at my Snapchat memories, and I got my first victory royale on March 8th, So a big week for all of us. If you remember the Battle of Blair Mountain, we're now going to discuss the precursor to that. In this time frame, early 1920s, West Virginia had just begun a union for miners, and companies began to hire non-union members. Even though they were union, the miners were still receiving lower wages, and a labor strike in another part of the country began, and that ended with the miners getting a higher payout. So, it was thought this could happen in West Virginia. So in 1920, the miners went on strike in the town of Mattawan. The local coal company, Stone Mountain, had hired their own enforcers to break up this strike, and they had apprehended Sid Hatfield, a local who was friends with the miners. As Sid was arrested, one of the enforcers shot at a miner, killing him, and Sid returned fire of his own, killing the agent. This then erupted into a big back and forth between both sides, and 7 enforcers were killed along with 2 miners. In response, the governor, John Cornwall, ordered the state police to take control of Mattawan, to which Hatfield and the miners stood down. More violence erupted as the trials began. Rail cars were being blown up and people were being beaten. Tom Phelps, who was the last surviving brother of the killed enforcers, tried to convict Sid Hatfield for what he did, and these charges were dismissed. In response, he killed Sid Hatfield, and this would begin the Battle of Blair Mountain. It's a sad state we live in. If you want a job, you can rather climb into the bowels of the earth and laboriously dig for a poisonous rock that destroys our environment, or you can work at Walmart. Those are the 2 employment options for the state. Take it or leave it. And through our history, West Virginians have taken the coal mining job. And it's a sad fact, but these mines are dangerous, and they've killed thousands of people. And we can begin this discussion with the first example of a mining disaster. And this is a more recent example. The Upper Big Branch mine is located in Raleigh County, and first opened in 1918. The mine has a long history of safety violations, with the more recent citations coming involving improper ventilation. In fact, the mine had received over 1,300 safety violations between 2005 to 2010. But unfortunately, these violations were not corrupted, and on April 5th, 2010, the Upper Big Branch mine exploded, killing 29 people. And the cause of the explosion? Improper ventilation. The mine couldn't even be entered for 2 months thanks to the massive buildup of toxic gas. The investigations into the mine targeted Don Blankenship, the mine's owner, where he was arrested and spent a year in jail. But today, Blankenship continues to deny responsibility for the mine disaster and is pursuing a spot in the state's politics. He should be laughed out of our state, and I hope he rots in hell. This is what, our 4th cryptid now? Sheep Squatch is an alleged 4-legged creature that was first spotted in 1994 by a couple of hunters in Boone County. They described it as a bear-like creature with thick, wool-like fur. Throughout the rest of the 90s, the citizens of Boone, Mason, Putnam, and Kanawha County continued to report sightings of the monster, and they all followed the same similar theme of a white-furred beast. But sightings of a white-furred monster date back to the early 1900s, when a man named Frank Kozel was headed home from work when he noticed a beast the size of a large dog with white fur, a large tail, and sharp teeth. No mention of sheep-like features are present, but it does make you wonder if there's any relation to the modern-day sightings. This has given rise to Sheep Squatch, who is best well known for appearing in an episode of Mountain Monsters and for being in Fallout 76. This is the only cryptid, maybe besides the Grafton Monster, I had not heard about pre-Fallout 76. And really, it's the least believable. You know what? Never mind. Sheep Squatch is real. Forget what I was about to say entirely. The biggest natural disaster we in West Virginia have to worry about is flooding. It gets pretty bad some years. And the worst disaster to ever hit us was probably the Great Ohio Valley Flood in 1937. Waters along the Ohio River began to rise on January 5th and continued to do so for the rest of the month. Areas in Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and West Virginia experienced record high levels that have yet to be topped since. Once it was all said and done, over 1 million people were left homeless, and damages reached $10.2 billion in modern money. The city in West Virginia affected the most was probably Huntington, our second largest. First responders and volunteers alike traveled the city in rowboats, rescuing people and moving them to a shelter in place. After the damage was done, a flood wall was installed, preventing something of this magnitude from happening again. It has since mitigated over $200 million in potential flood damage. While Camden Park is our state's only amusement park, there was another. The Lake Shawnee Amusement Park was first opened in 1926, and it closed 62 years later. This closure came after a set of unfortunate events. The first 40 years went off without a hitch, but in the 60s, 2 young guests lost their lives, one passing away from a ride accident and the other drowned. By 1966, Shawnee closed its doors to the public. It lay dormant for 20 years before being opened again in the 80s. But the new owners faced rising prices and popularity began to dwindle, so Lake Shawnee was closed again in 1988 for the last time. But that's not the end of the story. The owner uncovered Native American artifacts, so a team from Marshall University began a dig, where they found a mass grave of 13 skeletons, and from this, Lake Shawnee's dark history was uncovered. The land on which the amusement park was built was the site of a massacre. In 1785, landowner Mitchell Clay had his children murdered by Native Americans. Clay sought revenge for his children, and with the help of a couple landowners, the Native American raiding party was killed. These bodies were buried at Lake Shawnee. Once White saw this, his eyes turned green. He began to advertise the place as a haunted location, saying ghosts inhabited the area, including that of the Native Americans and the 2 children who had died at the park. Today, you can take a tour of Lake Shawnee if you want to find the ghost yourself. On June 22nd, 1932, the body of Mamie Thurman was found in a wild blackberry bush, sparking a decades-long investigation into her circumstances. Mamie was a beloved figure in the community, a good mother who worked at the local church. However, she also had a wild side, frequenting all the bars at nighttime. When her body was found, especially in the shape it was found, the quiet community was shocked. Her body was brutalized, shot, slashed with several broken bones, sparking an investigation into who had this much vitriol against her. Mamie had money on her, along with jewelry. The investigation targeted her landlord, because this is how their setup was. Harry Robertson had a house and a garage where Mamie and her husband lived, and another man lived in Harry's attic named Clarence Stevenson. So now in the investigation, bloody rags and a razor were found in the Robertsons' house. Keep in mind, this is the 30s. Blood tests for DNA weren't a thing yet. So, both Harry and Clarence were arrested, but only Clarence was charged. Why was this? It's a sad fact, but Clarence was a black man, and it's believed more well-off townspeople blamed him, using him as a scapegoat. Today, the legend of Mamie Thurman remains, as people claim to see her ghost standing by where her body was found, waiting for her murder to be avenged. Moundsville is a city located in Marshall County, West Virginia, and it's home to the Grave Creek Mound. Burial mounds are a really old process. Think of it as a raised mass grave. Bodies are buried at the bottom, and stacks of earth and rock are placed over it, and then the grass grows back over it, making a mound. Moundsville is home to the largest one of these in the United States. The Grave Creek Mound stands at 62 feet in height and at 240 feet in diameter. The mound hosts the body of the Adena, a group of Native Americans that lived between 500 BC and 100 CE in parts of Kentucky, Indiana, and of course, West Virginia. It's estimated that the Grave Creek Mound was built around 100 BC, making it over 2,100 years old. It's also estimated that over 60,000 tons of dirt were moved to create this thing. Today, it's designated a National Historical Landmark, and there is a museum at its site holding over 450,000 artifacts relating to the state's 10,000 years of Native American history in early West Virginia. West Virginia is home to thousands of species, but mountain goats are not one of them. But these creatures don't listen to our arbitrary rules, they go where they please, and one has made its home in our great state. At a mountain range in Nicholas County, a goat has been spotted there for 18 years. Despite these 18 years, no one has given her a name, yet she remains a popular tourist attraction, as thousands of people a year travel to Powell Mountain in an attempt to spot the goat. The story goes that a farmer owned this goat, and she kept getting loose, traveling clear to Powell Mountain, and the farmer would go and get her back and bring her home, yet she always broke out so the farmer eventually gave up, letting her roam freely, and she's been spotted for 18 years since. Before JFK was shot, he was president, and before he was president, he had to campaign. He made a very bold move and decided to campaign in West Virginia. We were more relevant back then, not by a lot, but we were just a tiny smidgen more relevant. Now, West Virginia was pretty much against Kennedy because of his status as a rich man's son and the fact that he was a Catholic. But Kennedy nonetheless decided to campaign in the state. He traveled up and down the state and met with thousands of voters who held small rallies across the entire area. He would wait for coal miners to get off their shifts and would shake their hands as they left. One of my favorite photos of Kennedy comes from this time, when he was up in the remote hollers of the state greeting people. Thanks to Kennedy's campaign efforts, West Virginia voted for him in both the primary and general elections. If Point Pleasant wasn't already accredited enough with the Mothman, some consider a battle that took place here to be the first of the Revolutionary War. The precursor to the Revolutionary War was Lord Dunmore's War, when the Virginian colony fought the Shawnee and Mingo Native American tribes. The Battle of Point Pleasant was the only major action of Lord Dunmore's War. The actual battle took place on October 10th, 1774, and saw 1,000 Virginia militiamen fighting around 400 Native Americans. Once the fighting was done and the Virginians returned home, the battles of Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts began, therefore starting the American Revolution, and Lord Dunmore would soon be fighting the men he led. West Virginia's terrain is mostly mountainous, or foresty. The last thing you'd think of is an island. However, we are surrounded by the Ohio River, and this has allowed the state to have a singular island, Blennerhassett Island in Parkersburg, West Virginia. The island is pretty small, yet it was engrossed in a conspiracy to start a civil war years before the actual American Civil War. When Aaron Burr was removed from his vice president position, he made a plan to have the southwestern United States secede from the Union. Burr had several contacts with foreign powers and began to discuss this plan with some of his British pals. However, Burr also had friends in the United States, and one of these friends was Harmon Blennerhassett. The Blennerhassett family owned Blennerhassett Island and the Blennerhassett Estate, where Aaron Burr began to headquarter his plans for a secession. But thanks to the fact that Burr was gallivanting all over the country spreading the word of rebellion, word got out to Thomas Jefferson, who ordered Burr's arrest. So in December of 1806, the Virginia militia surrounded Blennerhassett Island and arrested Burr. Blennerhassett fled, but was arrested. Burr was acquitted at his trial, so Blennerhassett was also let go, but he never returned back to the island. When Virginia seceded from the Union and discussions began about part of the state breaking away, several names were being discussed. The one that won was, of course, West Virginia. 200 years later, and when I say I'm from West Virginia, I might as well say I'm missing my teeth and I'm high on heroin. But if I would have said I'm from Kanawha or I'm from Vandalia, I think those names command respect. Kanawha was later used for one of our counties, the one where our capital actually is, but we fumbled the bag hard with Vandalia. That name goes so hard. Whoever picked West Virginia over Vandalia should be ashamed of themselves. West Virginia is home to a handful of snakes, like the garter snake, the copperhead, and rat snakes, but these guys are tiny. But it's possible there's a monster snake roaming the West Virginian land. In August of 2019, a Morgantown resident claimed to have lost his pet 15-foot-long python along the side of a road in Sabraton. It was his pet, and began to attack him, so he parked the car and the snake escaped, and has yet to be seen again. The snake's owner has been charged with the loss of a non-native species. Today, the citizens of Sabraton wait in fear for the Sabraton snake to strike again. In October of 1856, a young lady named Elva Heaston met a blacksmith named Eramus Shue, and then they fell in love, getting married soon after. But soon after this, Elva would die. Her body was found on January 23rd, 1897, and the cause was labeled as childbirth. But that's not where the story ends, as people have claimed to have seen her since. Her ghost has been spotted several times, firstly by her mother, and the things the ghost was telling her were strange. She said Erasmus had murdered her. Her mom went to the local prosecutor and pleaded with him to reopen the case, and after hours of convincing, they did. Upon examination, it was found her neck was snapped, which makes you wonder, why was her death labeled as a death of childbirth? That's not where the babies come from. But her husband was soon arrested after this discovery. Erasmus was held in the Lewisburg jail, where details on him began to come out. He had married twice before, and the first death ended in divorce, and the second ended when his wife disappeared under mysterious circumstances. His trial began on June 22nd, 1897, and the key witness was Elva's mom, and she explained the story of the ghost. And you'll never believe this, but Shu was found guilty of murder, and died 7 years later from a sickness, and was buried in an unmarked grave. Okay, this guy probably did kill his wife, but could you imagine if he didn't? You get accused of murder, and the key witness is a ghost, and you're still found guilty? And then you're buried in an unmarked grave? Once the Industrial Revolution began, the consequences on society became a disaster, and coal was needed to fund this disaster. And once coal was found in West Virginia, the state was forever changed. Many coal mines opened across the state, and one of the largest was in Monaga, a town in Marion County. The Monaga mine quickly became a large underground set of tunnels. Like many mines, safety standards were being ignored, and this had devastating consequences. On December 6, 1907, two massive explosions rocked the mine and killed 350 workers total. It's not fully known what caused this, but it's expected a massive deposit of methane gas was in the mine, and a spark caused the explosion. At this time, coal production was beginning to slow down, as the industry realized the dangers of the mines, and West Virginia was the leading example of this danger. West Virginians were experiencing more deaths and accidents than any other state, and the Monaga mining disaster remains the largest to this day. The Wheeling Suspension Bridge connects Ohio to the city of Wheeling, West Virginia, and this thing was first built in 1849, making it the first bridge to span a major Appalachian river. The bridge was a major point of contention during the American Civil War, as Confederate raiding parties targeted both the bridge and the railroads as a whole, as they were a crucial part of the northern economy. Today, the bridge still stands and is in use, and is on the Registry for Historical Landmarks.
People are in custody after police say they trespassed at a cabin on Crouch Hollow Road in Charleston. But it is how the suspects were found that is really raising some eyebrows. When deputies got to the scene, the suspects were found with their hands tied behind their backs like that. There's Channel 3's.
In June of 2023, Charleston deputies responded to an anonymous call that detailed a crime scene. Sure enough, once they arrived on Crouch Hollow Road, in front of them was the exact scene described. 4 suspects, all tied up with an ATV and a pickup truck to the side, all with the tires flat. Upon further investigation, stolen items from a local cabin were found. An investigation was launched, and once the suspects and other witnesses were interviewed, that's when the full story was revealed. The 4 were breaking into a cabin, and a masked man stopped them, slashed their tires, and subdued them before making a call to authorities, and then he just left. An investigation into the man was launched, but he has not been found. The only suspect eliminated was the owner of the cabin, who said he was grateful for the man's help, and he hopes he continues his vigilantism. So I'm sure a lot of you know who Hank Williams is. He was a famous country singer, but did you know Hank Williams died in West Virginia? In December of 1953, Hank was on his way from Alabama to West Virginia to perform at the Municipal Auditorium in Charleston, West Virginia, but he never made it. Williams was supposed to fly in, but because an ice storm was plaguing the area, he had to drive it. So, he hired a local college student named Charles Carr, to drive him. That sounds like a made-up name. But nonetheless, Williams and Carr in the car left Alabama, headed for West Virginia. The two stopped at a hotel in Knoxville for a night and continued on to Charleston. The two arrived at a small town named Oak Hill, West Virginia, where Carr stopped in an all-night restaurant to get something to eat. He asked Hank if he wanted anything, but he refused. So Carr got his meal and continued along, stopping at a gas station to refuel. Once he got back in the car, he saw Hank asleep in the back seat, but the blanket he was using to cover up fell off. Carr went to fix it for him, but he felt how cold Hank was. He tried to wake him up, but he was unresponsive. He wasn't asleep, he had passed away. Why did Hank suddenly pass? Well, he was a sick man, suffering intense back pain. To mitigate this pain, he began to abuse painkillers and alcohol, causing a spiral to begin. This affected every aspect of his health, and it's thought this is what had done him in. Hank's body was transported back to Montgomery, Alabama, but the gas station he passed away at has a plaque memorializing him. Nestled deep within the foothills of West Virginia sits something you would never think would be in the state, a Hindu temple. The New Vrindavan, more commonly known as the Palace of Gold, or the Appalachian Taj Mahal. This was built in the 1960s for members of the Hare Krishnas, a religious group based off of Hinduism. A man named Swami Prabhupada is the one who brought the Hare Krishnas into the state, and a man named Keith Gordon Ham became a devotee of Swami. He then leased 133 acres of land to the group, where the massive temple entered construction. It finished its construction in 1979, just in time for everything to go wrong. Swami passed away, and did not name a successor, so Keith Gordon stepped up. Keith sowed seeds of fear among his supporters, telling them they should be wary of outsiders, so they began to stockpile guns. Now in 1983, a member of the commune was killed, and 3 years later, a man writing a book on the Palace of Gold was killed, prompting investigations into the palace. The investigations resulted in the man's murderer, Thomas Dresche, to be sentenced to life in prison. Other more disturbing things were found during the investigation, including allegations that members were abusing children. All of this culminated into a raid on the palace, where Keith was arrested. He was acquitted, but he would be arrested again a year later, where he was sentenced to 20 years of prison. He was released in 2004 and died soon after. Today, the place serves as a hotel and has venues for weddings and other events. On the night of November 2nd, 1966, a man named Woodrow Derenberger was driving on Interstate 77 in Parkersburg when he saw something crash through the sky. He described it as a flying kerosene lamp, and it touched down in front of him. Something stepped out from the lamp and made contact with Woodrow. Derenberger described him as a tall, pale man wearing a green suit with a wide smile. The humanoid began to communicate with Woodrow telepathically and began to ask him questions about Earth. Woodrow was frightened, and the creature noticed this, and he told him, "We mean you no harm." He then gave Woodrow his name, Indrid Cold. Of course, Woodrow reported this to the Parkersburg police, and of course, others read the story and came forward with their own versions of seeing and meeting Indrid Cold. And among these continued reports was Woodrow Derenberger. He said that Indrid continued to visit him after this. At the wishes of the community, Woodrow got himself checked into a psychologist, where he was given a clean bill of health. Eventually, the story faded into obscurity, but has been picked back up by the pop culture zeitgeist. Indrid was a character in the Mothman prophecies, and he appears in Fallout 76, cementing him in the cryptozoology sphere of West Virginia. You think we've learned from 100+ years of mining disasters, but no. We discussed the Upper Big Branch mine disaster, which is probably the most recent one, but not the only one of the 21st century, and this one took place before. At the Sago mine in Sago, West Virginia, an explosion rocked the mine at the start of the first shift at 6:30 in the morning, trapping 13 miners in the cave for 2 days, and at the end, only one would survive. The rescue operation took an hour and a half to begin, and they had to begin by venting away the toxic gases that had built up, including methane and carbon dioxide. The one who survived, Randall McCoy, gave his account to what happened, and he made a full recovery, albeit taking several months of emerging from a coma, along with physical therapy. The mine reopened soon after this, but facing criticism, it closed permanently in December of 2008. At the onset of the Great Depression, men across the country became desperate, and they were willing to do anything for money. And this is where we're at with this entry. During the Depression, around 3,000 men came to West Virginia to dig a tunnel at Hawk's Nest near Gauley Bridge. This was a part of a hydroelectric project, and this tunnel was made to move the river to the dam. The men here worked for 10 to 15 hours a day, digging and using drills and dynamite and whatever else to destroy the sandstone. The miners here were not given breathing equipment, and these workers developed silicosis, an incurable lung disease. Of these workers, around 800 or as many as 1,000 died from breathing in this dust. Today, a historical marker sits at Hawks Nest Tunnel, memorializing those who lost their lives. We've touched on the many Capitol buildings of West Virginia earlier, and now we're finally back to it. After the back-and-forth game they played for a while, switching between Wheeling and Charleston for the Capitol spot, the new and final Capitol building was finished in 1887, and it would last for 34 years. But a fire of unknown origins broke out on January 3rd, 1921. This fire spread quickly, and some moron had left ammunition at the top of the building. So as it spread, it hit that ammunition and it went off, firing into the nearby crowd. And if this wasn't enough chaos, two men stole one of the local fire trucks and they took it for a joyride through Charleston. They were caught, but they needed like 50 more fire trucks to put this thing out. It was raging bad. After the building was destroyed, a temporary Capitol was constructed, but it also burnt down. Enough work was done on the new Capitol building to continue work there. During the American Civil War, a battle took place in Lewisburg, where a vastly outnumbered Union force defeated the Confederate forces. After the battle, Union General George Crook refused to hold burial ceremonies for the fallen Confederates. Now, Lewisburg was severely sympathetic to the Confederate forces, so the citizens defied orders and laid the Confederate soldiers to rest in a trench. Years later, they were dug up and moved to a proper cemetery. A cross-shaped burial mound marks the final resting place for these 95 dead, unknown soldiers. If you wanted to see an old Swiss town with Swiss ties and Swiss history, the last place you'd think to look would be West Virginia, but it should have been the first place to look, as there is such a thing. Helvetia is a tiny town in Randolph County and was founded in 1869, right after the Civil War. Indeed, the town was founded by German and Swiss immigrants living in Brooklyn. They decided to move and they formed their own town, and the land in West Virginia was purchased for its low cost. Today, less than 59 people live in the city, but they still hold on to their Swiss roots, with several festivals being held, along with the city keeping the town's Swiss aesthetic. You know, as a kid, I was terrified of tornadoes, and I remember just watching the Weather Channel, scared out of my mind. And I'd hear news of a tornado, run in, yell, screaming, telling my family, "Oh guys, come on, there's a tornado on its way." And they'd walk in and they'd say, "Tanner, that thing's in Georgia." I was like 8, cut me some slack. But if there's a natural disaster in West Virginia we have to worry about, it's usually a flood. But that doesn't mean there's others affecting us. And the second in line is probably tornadoes. They are insanely common, but there was an outbreak of tornadoes in the Appalachian area in 1944, and it remains the deadliest to this day. In total, across Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, 7 tornadoes struck, and the deadliest one to hit West Virginia was the Shinston tornado, which killed over 100 people, still making it the deadliest one in the state and the only one to ever produce violent damage. If there's a disaster in this state, it's usually involving flooding or coal, and this entry just happens to involve both. Coal plants produce something called a slurry, a mixture of coal waste and water and just whatever else junk they don't need. And the Buffalo Creek plant had 3 dams containing this slurry. The 3rd dam was the newest, and it was built on top of old cold slurry that had kind of spilled over and became like concrete through sedimentation. But dams need to be built on stronger stuff than that. So Dam 3 eventually collapsed, and if things couldn't get worse, a torrential downpour began. So with the waters of the collapsed dam and the rain continually pouring down, the other 2 dams collapsed, flooding local communities with over 130 million gallons of water, coal paste, and just whatever else was in that crap. 1,121 people were injured, and 125 were killed. In 1850, the state of West Virginia began discussions of building the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, and it was set to be built in Weston, located in modern-day West Virginia. The state deposited funds into the local bank to be used in the building. The construction began in 1858, but just 3 years later, Virginia would leave the Union, and the rest of the funds would be sent to Richmond for the war effort. But a man named Francis H. Piermont, the mayor of Weston, was loyal to the Union, so he reached out to a local Union general named George McClellan, informing him of what was going on. So, he sent a detachment of Union soldiers, where they marched into Weston and seized his remaining funds for the project in the form of gold bullion. The gold was then transported back to Wheeling, the de facto capital of West Virginia, where it was used to fund the local government. This just sounds like something waiting to be made into a movie. A Civil War gold heist, let's do it. Let's travel back to 1861. Several of the United States had just broken away to form the Confederate States of America, and Virginia was one of these states, which of course included West Virginia. We've discussed that people in West Virginia did not agree with the decision of Virginia's secession. That's a tongue twister. So there were Northern sympathizers, especially with the further north you went to the state. And one of the more sympathetic cities was Grafton. 2 Union soldiers left from Grafton, headed for Prunttown, West Virginia, to recruit soldiers for the Union Army. These soldiers were Daniel Wilson and the focus of this entry, Thornsbury Bailey Brown. The 2 soldiers were headed home from the Virginia city, where they encountered 3 Confederate soldiers. After a scuffle, Thornsbury shot at one, and they returned fire, killing Thornsbury, making him the first ever Union soldier to be killed in the Civil War. The Confederates took the body back to their camp and their commander. Upon hearing of this, a group of Union soldiers from Grafton headed for the Confederate camp in order to retrieve Brown's body by any means necessary. Brown's body was recovered, and he was buried in Grafton. In a tiny town in Tyler County sits Ben's Run, and in Ben's Run sits the Ben's Run's Earthworks, a discovery that still puzzles archaeologists. Earthworks is a broad term, but usually refers to any form of earth being worked. Think of the burial mounds we've mentioned, or just tunnels being dug, anything of that sort. But it's thought, what's left of the Ben's Run's Earthworks is just a tiny piece of the entire puzzle, as only a small burial mound is mentioned. The first mention of an earthworks comes from Lewis Summers, when in his 1808 journal, he depicted an ancient encampment with square trenches closing an area in of 10 acres. It's mentioned again in 1818 and again in 1820, but all of these descriptions are bigger than what is there now. In 1965, the Ben's Run's earthworks were officially recorded, but by that time, they were gone. And all studies of the area resulted in no evidence of an enclosure ever being there, leaving behind a mystery 10 acres in size. Where did the Ben's Run's earthworks go? Were they ever real, or were they embellished? Where were you on January 6, 2021? Because I was at my house with my feet propped up on my desk watching a Technoblade live stream, when I get a message from one of my friends asking me if I saw what was going on at the Capitol. And sure enough, I got on Twitter and saw the news that about 10,000 losers had gathered at the Capitol building in an attempt to disrupt the Electoral College vote. One of these 10,000 losers was Derek Evans, one of West Virginia's delegates. Not only was he there, he videoed himself yelling Trump's name before following the crowd inside the Capitol building. As he shouted, "Derek Evans in this Capitol, I don't know where we're going." He was arrested 2 days later. 2 days after this, following condemnation from the state senate and governor justice, Evans resigned his position. On his legal end, he pled guilty to his felony charges and spent 3 months in jail, being released in October 2022. 1 year later, he renounced his guilty plea and stated he'd be running for a House of Representatives seat. In December of 2023, he posted a video of a Christmas tree of ornaments featuring President Biden, Vice President Harris, and Dr. Fauci being hung by nooses. Just a bit of insight into the brainpower we have leading the state. But some good news, he did lose the election in the 2024 primaries. I've only covered about half of Derek Evans' insanity. If you want to further dive into this man, let me know. The Blennerhassett Hotel is the oldest hotel in West Virginia, being opened in 1899. It's often referred to as haunted, as several guests have claimed to see ghosts during their stay. The most commonly reported ghost is the woman in the elevator, with people reporting a female following them into the elevator before suddenly disappearing. Other reports have came from staff and guests alike as silhouettes stalking through the grounds of the hotel, being caught out of the corner of their eyes. There's more specific cases, like the man in the bowler hat, who is said to be wearing a bowler hat and he's reeking of cigars, men in white tuxedos hanging around, and probably the creepiest, people have reported a woman just screaming from the hotel's library. In 1978, the Allegheny Power System began building a new coal-powered electric plant along the Ohio River, and this newest one was to be built on Willow Island, located in Pleasant County. The new plant was going to have 2 generators in total, and by April, 1 tower was built, with construction beginning on the 2nd. On April 27th, the tower reached a height of 166 feet, but it would go no taller, as the concrete of the tower began to collapse from under the weight of the scaffolding and the workers on it, and right after 10 a.m., the entire tower collapsed, sending all 51 workers on the scaffolding to their death. This is the deadliest construction accident in all of American history, and I actually had 3 family members working there when it happened. My grandfather, his father, and one of my cousin's spouses. My grandfather had talked to me about this, and he said he was one of the first people to find a body in the mess, and as they left the site, a crowd had gathered, and they just kept asking him, "Where's this guy, and is this guy okay?" And my grandfather probably said something like, "Oh, I don't know, we just don't know," but he probably did know. Meanwhile, back home, my grandma was just watching the TV, the news report, and there were no phones. They didn't have a phone, so she couldn't call and ask if he was okay. So she spent the entire day worrying about him, worrying if he was alright or if he was coming home that night. It's pretty sad. What a way to end the iceberg. Sorry. And here we are, about what, an hour and a half later, and I hope you've learned something new about my home. I know this isn't the video some of my fans were looking forward to, but yes, the Cold War iceberg is next. It grew in size, and I've been spending a lot of time on it, and I really wanted it to be the best thing I've edited yet. And as always, I will not rush out a video. If it needs more time, it needs more time. But yes, it's next, and I hope you've enjoyed this one in the meantime. I'll see you in the next one very soon, like hopefully 2 weeks soon. But until then, thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.